Early one March morning, Charleston was still drowsy beneath a light veil of mist. The wind drifted past the red-tiled rooftops, curling down cobblestone streets, like the memory of an old city. At the corner of King Street, the wooden door of the Rose and Rye bookstore opened with a soft jingle of wind chimes. Evelyn Hart stepped out, holding a gift wrapped in cream-colored paper and tied with a deep navy ribbon. She was 56 years old, slim in frame, but composed, exuding the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to the world. The gift in her hands was a first edition of The Fire. Next Time, a book she had spent 3 months searching for to commemorate her 25th wedding anniversary with her husband Henry. Her hair, streaked with gray and salt, was neatly tied back in a low bun. A white silk blouse draped gently over her frame, paired with loose linen trousers and soft leather shoes that made a subtle clop sound with each step, like the rhythm of a morning sonata. Around her neck hung a simple but elegant pearl necklace, glinting in the sunlight, like a silent message. Some things endure if we know how to preserve them. Evelyn was in no rush. Every step she took seemed to stitch new thread into the red brick path of memory. The same streets where she had once been a teacher, a community advisor, a quiet symbol of dignity in a city that had never made life easy for a black woman. She nodded at the flower vendor by the shop and smiled at the older woman feeding birds on her porch. No one called her name, but everyone recognized her silhouette, not because she was famous, but because she carried a reverence that needed no noise. But just a few blocks away, inside a white and blue patrol car, parked like a boulder amid the current of traffic on King Street, Officer Brett Kellerman had locked eyes on Evelyn as sharply as a scope's red dot. In his hand was a cheap coffee cup. His face was sun-worn, and his gray eyes were dulled by long nights on watch. But his entire posture stiffened when the sunlight hit the pearls around that black woman's neck. There had been no theft reports. No suspect descriptions were fed to his patrol computer. But in Kellerman's mind, the details automatically pieced together pearls, elegant clothing, unfamiliar face, black. That was all he needed to register something as suspicious. Evelyn didn't need to turn around to know she was being watched. Her breath slowed. That feeling, the weight of a gaze wielded like a gavel, one that assigns guilt before it asks questions. She had known it since her youth. Her hand slipped into her coat pocket, fingers brushing the edge of her phone. I'm not trembling, just checking. The small shield of technology was still there. She had taught her daughter. The right to record the truth is your first right to self-defense. The cruiser began to roll behind her. The sound of tires over bricks blended with the rhythm of her clop-clop steps. It might have been a morning melody, but now the rhythm faltered. Evelyn kept walking, spine upright, eyes forward, as if the earth belonged to her alone, because she knew that when they looked at her like an outsider, she had to walk like she belonged. She also knew that this peaceful morning was about to end. Brett Kellerman shifted into the park. The car door clicked open, a slight sound, but it squeezed the air out of King Street like a vice. He stepped out. Tactical boots hit the bricks like a warning drumbeat. His eyes never left Evelyn. His hand brushed instinctively over the grip of his gun. A reflex, but one that sent a clear signal power was ready to fire. Evelyn heard the heavy footsteps behind her, but she didn't turn. She adjusted the strap of her bag, letting it glide over her silk blouse in a light yet deliberate gesture. She knew the unspoken laws of streets like this: walk too fast, and they'll say you're running. Stop too suddenly, and they'll tell you're hiding something. So she kept her steady, measured pace, even as her heart began to pound. Ma'am. The word burst out like a command from a sealed machine. Evelyn stopped, slowly turned. The sun caught the brim of Kellerman's cap, casting his eyes into shadow, like two ink-black pits. Officer, is there something I can help you with? Her voice was soft, yet firm, like silk wrapped around steel. Brett Kellerman's jaw tightened. His eyes darted quickly from the gift in Evelyn's hands to the pearl necklace at her throat, as if one of those items was silently accusing her. Nice jewelry. Got a receipt for that? He asked, voice low and sharp. Not a question, but an accusation. A strange hush fell over King Street. The sounds of the market of wheels and coffee cups came to a halt. Evelyn tilted slightly as if the question had crossed a line more insult than procedure. This is personal property. Do you have any legal basis to inspect it? Her voice was calm, but each word fell to the brick pavement, like nails into the coffin of prejudice. Kellerman's face stretched into a half-smirk. We got a report of a jewelry theft this morning. The description matches. The word matches dropped like a stone into still water, sending silent ripples through the crowd beginning to form. A brown-skinned girl across the street pulled out her phone and switched to landscape mode. Two delivery workers stood frozen beside their dolly eyes, taut as a drawn wire. Evelyn stared straight into his eyes, unflinching. If you read that report, you'd know the suspect wasn't carrying a first edition of James Baldwin. She lifted the gift slightly. I doubt any thief strolls down the street with a ribbon-wrapped present like this. Kellerman hesitated, not because of the logic, but because of the lenses. He blinked, visibly rattled. The phones now surrounded him like sleepless eyes. His hand lowered slightly, but instinct hovered near his holster. Let me see some ID. Just a routine check, ma'am. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. Routine or prejudice? The question rang loud enough for every recording mic to catch. A wave of silence sucked the air from the street. Someone let out a soft hiss. Oh. Not from surprise, but from awakening. Kellerman's gaze flickered a blink faster than usual. He sensed now that every movement of his had entered a courtroom without walls, judged by thousands watching from every angle. I'm conducting an investigation. Obstructing an officer is a criminal offense, he growled, but the edge in his voice had begun to falter. Evelyn didn't shrug, didn't smirk. She only spoke softly, but enough for every mic to record. I'm not obstructing. I'm asking for a valid reason. And it appears you still haven't found one. A whistle sounded from somewhere nearby. Then a voice. That's right, from an elderly man leaning on a tree. Nods followed. Eyes shifted from suspicion to solidarity. The power dynamic began to tilt. Kellerman looked around, sensing the ground beneath him. Tilt too. He adjusted his belt, trying to recapture authority. Step aside. You're interfering with an investigation. But no one stepped aside. An older man in a faded shirt moved half a step forward, standing between Evelyn and the sunlight. A small gesture, but one that carried the weight of history. Evelyn didn't turn to acknowledge him. She kept her breathing steady. She recalled a night 30 years ago, when Henry, then just a young patrol officer, took her hand and said, I swear, I'll do everything I can so you never have to fear the police. Today, that promise seemed to hang by a thread, and she was the one holding it taut. A familiar engine sound came from down the street. Evelyn didn't turn, but the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. Not a smile, a signal. The storm is coming. A familiar black SUV turned onto King Street tires, hissing on brick, stopping with perfect timing. Headlights lit up Evelyn's hair, casting light on the pearl necklace, like a glowing beacon. No one moved. Even the radio on Kellerman's shoulder fell silent. And in the heavy stillness, one unspoken question hung in the air like a verdict. Whose side will power choose to protect? The sleek black SUV stopped right by the curb. The door hadn't opened yet, but all eyes were already drawn to it, as if a fault line was about to split open. Phones were raised higher. A few people instinctively stepped back, as if sensing that the next moment would not be part of an ordinary day. Beside it, Officer Brett Kellerman flinched. His hand still hovered near his holster. His eyes narrowed, flicking between Evelyn and the vehicle. He had no idea that he had already stepped too far, that one more move and he would not just be pointing his authority at a woman, but at a symbol, at a truth he had no power to control. The SUV door opened with a click. A voice rang out deep, steady, and commanding without needing to shout. "Officer Kellerman, step away from the citizen immediately." The entire street froze. That voice was not just any voice, not a subordinate, and certainly not someone who would let what had just happened is swept quietly aside. Out stepped Henry Hart, Chief of Police of Charleston. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisply pressed black uniform, and had gold stars gleaming on his epaulets. But his eyes made King Street fall silent. The eyes of a husband, not just a superior, a husband who had just watched his wife have a gun nearly drawn on her, on live stream. Evelyn still stood tall. She did not lower her gaze or look to her husband for rescue. Not because she didn't need support, but because she understood this confrontation had to bear her face first. Kellerman stood frozen. His face had gone pale, his eyes darting in panic like a trapped animal. His mouth opened and closed in stutters. "I didn't know." Henry didn't shout. He stepped forward, placing himself between his wife and the officer. His voice was low but sharp like a blade drawn from its sheath. "You don't need to know who she is to treat her with decency." No one spoke. The sound of Henry's polished shoes on brick echoed like a verdict being carved out, step by step. He looked Kellerman in the eye, not with rage, but with something worse, disappointment. "As of this moment, you are suspended from duty. Disarm hand over your badge." The command fell like a hammer. Kellerman stood stunned. It wasn't just the punishment. It was the fact that it came in broad daylight on the street before the cameras, and from the man whose black wife had just been racially profiled. A quiet wave rippled through the crowd. No cheering, but there were nods, slow exhales of relief. An older woman holding a bouquet smiled through tears. A student panned their phone to capture the moment. Henry raised his hand, signaling the internal affairs team to leave the SUV. Kellerman slowly unholstered his weapon and placed it on the patrol car hood. The cold clink of metal on steel sounded like a chain hitting the ground. Henry said nothing more. He turned to Evelyn. In his eyes was an apology he couldn't voice, because even as chief, he couldn't stop a crooked system from putting his wife through this. Evelyn gave a slight nod. No blame, no bitterness, just the gaze of someone who knew. Sometimes a storm is needed to clear the dust that settled too long on the face of justice. The crowd began to murmur. A few people clapped, slow but firm, and as Henry turned to face all of King Street, he said, "Thank you. The videos you recorded are evidence. If you've ever filed a complaint and heard nothing back, my office will be open all week." A young man shouted, "We'll be there, sir." A breeze swept through, rustling the hem of Evelyn's ocean blue coat. In the morning light, the pearl necklace at her neck shimmered no longer. Just jewelry, but a symbol of something transcending physical form. That morning on an old brick street, faith in justice, however fractured, was pieced back together by the quiet defiance of a woman and the right decision of a man who wore gold stars on his shoulder. That morning, just hours after the video of Evelyn Hart being held at gunpoint went viral. A 14-minute live stream shot by a high school student named Luis Rivera surpassed 2 million views. The frame was shaky, starting with a close-up of a pearl necklace in the sunlight and ending with the moment the officer placed his firearm on the patrol car. But what made millions stop to watch wasn't the drama. It was the voice. Evelyn's voice, calm and steady, rose in the choking air of injustice. "I don't need anyone's permission to walk down the street, and I don't need anyone to define my dignity by the color of my skin." That sentence was quoted everywhere. Twitter, Facebook community forums, even international media. Hashtags like #justice. For Evelyn, Hashtag pearls are not a crime, and hashtag walk with dignity climbed to the top of trending lists within hours. One photo spread like wildfire. Evelyn standing in the middle of King Street, her coat fluttering in the breeze, pearls glowing like a soft flame. People began to call it the still flame. Meanwhile, inside the Charleston Police Department, Henry Hart sat alone in his office, eyes fixed on the screen, replaying the footage. Not to review evidence he already knew every detail, but because he was confronting something more dangerous than a weapon. A system long trained to go silent in the face of wrongdoing. A message popped up in his internal inbox. Queen Hart doesn't speak for us. No sender. Just a cold sentence, like a drop of ink falling onto a white page, faceless but unmistakably revealing. Henry didn't reply. He clicked forward, sending it to Internal Affairs with a single line attached. Every shadow begins where the light refuses to reach. At that same time, in another corner of the city, Evelyn sat in her modest kitchen, her old laptop on the dining table. Beside a steaming pot of ginger tea, her phone buzzed non-stop with calls and messages from all over. CNN requested a live interview. The local station wanted to feature her in a Woman of the City segment. A civil rights organization invited Evelyn as an honorary guest to the Dignity and Citizenship Conference in New York. She remained silent, responding to none. Evelyn understood that fame was never the destination of justice. Her husband Henry stepped into the doorway. There is no uniform today. Just a husband fresh from a meeting with 6 department heads, half of whom supported his decision. The other half chose silence. But Henry didn't need a majority. He only needed truth. He placed a folder gently on the table. Evelyn. These are 23 complaints that were dismissed over the past 5 years. 13 of them describe exactly what you went through. Now they're resubmitting them because they saw you stand, and now they want to stand with you. Evelyn said nothing. She opened her laptop, started a new document, and typed the heading, Proposal Establishment of an Independent Civilian Oversight Board, Draft 10. Henry looked at his wife. His eyes held no fear, no worry about public backlash, only conviction that what had started with a moment of injustice on the street was now quietly becoming the beginning of a sustained and silent revolution. As the sun dipped behind Charleston's historic rooftops that evening, the street lamps flickered on, casting light over red bricks still warm from the day. Under those lights, a group of college students taped a new poster onto a public wall. 8 a.m. tomorrow. City Hall. Bring your story. Not to cry, but to end the days of silent endurance. In the corner of the poster, handwritten in small, careful script, because someone stood still. We can now step forward. The next morning, as the clock struck exactly 8 a.m., Charleston's City Hall Square was still wrapped in a thin mist. Plastic chairs hastily arranged the night before were beaded with dew. The city flag fluttered lightly in the breeze, while the first sounds, footsteps, whispers, chairs being dragged, began to stir the space like a quiet prelude. Evelyn Hart arrived early. She wore a simple deep blue coat, her salt and pepper hair neatly pinned. The same pearl necklace from the day before adorned her neck, glistening as the first ray of sunlight filtered through the trees. In her hands, she held a slim folder, Proposal for the Establishment of an Independent Civilian Oversight Board, the first draft unfinished, but already carrying the hopes of a generation long forced into silence. At 8:17, only 24 people were scattered across the square. A retired teacher brought her folding chair. A single mother held her baby. A high school student stood with a trembling hand holding a handwritten sign. Dignity is not something I need to prove. Evelyn stood behind the microphone, eyes calm, voice low and steady. I'm not asking anyone to be a hero. I'm simply asking, don't turn away from the truth. A few claps echoed, hesitant, sparse, but enough to awaken the old city. By 8:45, the crowd had quadrupled. A group of college students from Charleston University arrived straight from their night shifts at coffee shops, shirts still stained with milk. A white man, a construction worker, came by bike, carrying a sign with handcuffs and the words, "I was wrongly arrested once." But no one live-streamed for me. A silver-haired woman raised her hand to speak. In 1969, I was forced to resign for reporting a police officer who harassed students. I thought that story would stay buried forever. But yesterday, I saw Mrs. Evelyn standing in the street. I knew it was time for me to stand too, even if it was late. The square fell utterly silent. Luis Rivera, the student who had live-streamed the day before, stepped up with his phone mounted on a tripod. "I'm not a journalist, not a lawyer. I'm just a kid who knows things might have gone differently if I hadn't filmed that day." His voice cracked, but his hand stayed firm on the camera. Below the live stream, the counter read 8:2:14, watching 9:05 a.m., no chairs left. Over 2,000 people crowded the City Hall steps, spilling onto Meeting Street. Handmade signs of all shapes and materials filled the square. Not because I'm famous, but because I exist. No longer the silent victim. If Mrs. Evelyn didn't bow her head, I won't either. Evelyn no longer needed the microphone. Every time she stepped up, the crowd fell quiet. She invited others to speak. A trembling 15-year-old boy shared, "My teacher said I had violent potential. I only asked why I got a bad grade." A brown-skinned janitor spoke in broken Spanish. "They check my bag every time I clock out. Every day. No apology." A black female doctor stood, tears streaking down her cheeks. "They call me a nurse, a hospital helper, but I hold a specialist license, and I'm not silent anymore." By 10:15 a.m., the crowd kept growing. Church groups arrived, standing in rows, nodding quietly at each testimony. Local news stations began broadcasting live. CNN, MSNBC, and even BBC News sent reporters. And somewhere in the crowd, a young black police officer not in uniform, Elisa Gray, stood with arms crossed, eyes ablaze. She had been reprimanded for reporting an abuse of power 3 years earlier. Today, she whispered to the person beside her, "I'm going to speak. This time, no one's going to shut me down." By the end of the morning, Evelyn Hart stood on the highest step. No notes, no formal speech. She said, "Each story shared today has laid a new brick for this city, and if we want it to stand, we must keep building with truth." The entire square erupted in applause, not because of grand oration, but because in each voice they saw themselves. The iconic still flame photo made the front pages of 16 major newspapers that afternoon. But a new photo began spreading even faster, one that showed the entire square before Charleston's City Hall, filled with thousands of people standing tall, holding signs that read, "I will not stay silent." At that moment, Charleston stopped being a city that once knew pain. It became a place where the people decided they would no longer kneel before fear. Monday morning, inside the Charleston Police Department headquarters, the air turned strangely tense. A chilling silence took over in the officers' break room, usually bustling with laughter, clinking spoons and patrol stories. On the white wall behind the coffee machine, a message in bold black marker stood out. "Queen Evelyn doesn't speak for us." No signature. No one claimed responsibility, but everyone knew it was a direct blow to the honor of Chief Inspector Maxwell Hart. Evelyn's husband, Maxwell, walked in. A few officers sipping coffee paused mid-bite. Some pretended to check their phones. No one spoke. He stared directly at the message. It didn't blink. "I didn't ask who wrote it. I didn't order it removed," he said in a voice colder than the paint on the wall. "I don't need anyone to speak for me, And my wife certainly doesn't need anyone to crown her queen. But if you think silence protects truth, then you've misjudged me, and you've misjudged this badge." He turned and walked out, not as a commander, but as a lone warrior, stepping onto an internal battlefield. 17 a.m. Maxwell entered the executive conference room, where 16 division captains from SWAT to Rapid Response were waiting. The long walnut table didn't tremble, but the tension in the air stretched like a wire about to snap. Maxwell stood at the head of the table. No preamble. No thanks. Only one question. How many of you here believe that if we keep covering up wrongdoing, the public will still trust this department? Silence. Then, SWAT Commander Travis Cole spoke. "With all due respect, Chief, what you're doing is putting your fellow officers at odds with the people we serve." Maxwell didn't frown. He raised his head, looking each person in the eye. "If standing before the public scares you, maybe we're no longer their protectors." A tapping sound began at the far end of the table. Captain Jessica Min, young African Vietnamese head of public affairs, spoke clearly. "I support a full internal review. I filed a complaint about bias once. It was dismissed. Today I'll refile it." A ripple of unease swept across the room. Some averted their eyes. Some lowered their heads. That afternoon, Maxwell signed an unprecedented order to reopen all 122 internal cases dismissed over the past 10 years. Specifically, cases labeled insufficient evidence. Complaints were deemed lacking in detail. Reports from victims without body cam footage. He required all officers must resubmit their disciplinary records within 14 days, including anything previously settled internally, a move never before seen in the department's history. One newspaper called it an earthquake within the fortress. Inside the department, whispers swirled. He's declared war on the whole system. 7:04 p.m. Maxwell returned home, his shoulders heavy. Evelyn sat at the dining table, handwriting a program for tomorrow's community meeting. She didn't ask, "What happened today?" Didn't say, "What are they saying about me?" She placed a hand on her husband's shoulder and said quietly, "If anyone says you're going too far, tell them this. It's not that I'm too aggressive. It's that you've grown too comfortable with inaction." Maxwell looked at her, not with fatigue, but with quiet strength. 11:52 p.m. An anonymous text came to Maxwell's phone. "If you keep digging, you'll be buried with it. Final warning." Attached is a photo, sitting in a news studio. Evelyn fastened her mic for the next day's interview. A red X was crudely drawn across her face, like a death mark. Maxwell gripped the phone. A cold sweat ran down his spine. Then he typed only one line in reply. "If truth can be threatened by darkness, then I have to burn brighter." Charleston had begun to shake from within, and the next battle would not take place on the streets. It would erupt within soundproof rooms where people once believed truth could never enter. As Evelyn left the house to prepare for her live television interview the next morning, she sensed something different. Fresh tire tracks were still visible on the sidewalk in front of her house, stretching all the way to the end of the block before fading away. A figure sat motionless inside a silver car, with no front license plate, wearing a baseball cap and dark sunglasses, completely still. Just like the day before. She didn't call Maxwell. She didn't post anything online. She got in her car and drove off, head facing forward, but in her rearview mirror. The sedan followed. At a distance legal enough to pass, yet too close to be a coincidence. At WCHS studio, cameras were ready. The host, Tasha Lynn, a young, sharp woman who once studied under Evelyn at law school, adjusted her microphone. "You're still wearing the same pearl necklace from that day?" Tasha asked gently, fastening the mic to Evelyn's collar. Evelyn nodded slightly. "It's not just jewelry. It's a memory. A reminder of what's worth protecting." The camera rolled. The red light blinked on Tasha began. Yesterday morning, thousands gathered before City Hall to stand with you and reclaim their voice. But last night you received threats. Why did you still decide to appear on air today? Evelyn didn't blink. Because if I step back one step, the person who threatens me will step one forward. And before we know it, we'll be back in the silence we came from. The interview spread like wildfire, especially the moment Evelyn said, "I'm not afraid of being targeted. What I fear is that others will see me being targeted and believe they can't do anything." By 3:20 p.m., the 7-minute clip had already surpassed 4 million views on Twitter and Facebook. The hashtag #Don'tBeSilent anymore climbed to #1, trending nationwide. But at the same time, a shadow network began to stir. That evening, at a small riverside bar tucked into a dim corner, 5 men gathered around a table. One of them, gray-haired in a leather jacket, placed an iPad on the table and played Evelyn's interview. "They're trying to topple everything." Another, dragging on a cigarette, replied, "If Maxwell isn't kicked out soon, all of us will be dragged into the light." A third man spoke with a gravelly tone. "We spent years building this stable system, and now the whole thing's shaking because of some old lady in pearls." The first man slammed the table. "We have to snuff this fire out, in the name of stability." When Evelyn returned home that night, the motion sensor porch light didn't turn on. The bulb had been shattered. Glass shards scattered across the front steps. Inside the mailbox, a single folded white sheet of paper. No words, no signature. Evelyn's hand didn't tremble, but her chest tightened. This wasn't a warning. This was a message. We're getting close. The next morning, Maxwell returned to the police department. On the glass of his office door, a new message had been hastily scrawled in thick black marker, big enough to read from a distance. "Not everyone in uniform is your brother." But instead of erasing it, Maxwell took a marker and wrote underneath, "And not everyone who stands for justice needs a uniform to be righteous." That evening before bed, Evelyn reopened the live stream of her interview. Thousands of comments were pouring in beneath the video. "Because of you. I finally talked about being pulled from my car last year. My mother was once searched just for wearing a silk dress. Now I understand why she always kept her head down. I'll be at the square this Friday." Evelyn closed her laptop. I turned off the lights, but inside her, the light never dimmed, because she knew the shadows had begun to stir. But this time they could no longer blanket the city quietly. Not when the light of thousands of people had left them nowhere to hide. Charleston's sky hung low with gloom, the clouds thick as if holding their breath. Yet in front of City Hall, the square was packed wall to wall with people, makeshift loudspeakers, and handwritten signs reading, "Justice is not a favor, we're everywhere." Evelyn Hart stood in the center of the crowd. No podium, no microphone, only the voice of a woman who had lived through enough pain to know that silence is the weapon of the oppressor. She raised her head, gently touched the white pearl necklace around her neck, the 25th wedding anniversary gift, and then spoke soft, but resolute. "I'm not here to demand justice for myself. I'm here to remind you all. If today you turn your back tomorrow, it could be your daughter who has a gun pointed at her just for daring to walk tall." Applause thundered through the square. Far beyond the light of that square, 3 men sat in a dark-colored SUV, 3 blocks away, watching the live stream. One of them muttered, "She's becoming a storm, if we don't stop it at the root." The man in the middle cut him off, his voice cold as steel. "Tonight, when she leaves the community center, no trace." Meanwhile, at the Charleston Police Department, Chief Inspector Maxwell Hart, Evelyn's husband, found a sealed envelope on his desk. No name, no signature. Inside, a screenshot from Evelyn's live stream and a printed line of text, "If you don't stop her, we will. And next time, it won't be a photo. Maxwell gripped the picture. He didn't call anyone. He didn't report it. He opened his drawer, pulled out his badge and service weapon items. He had locked away after the first public hearing and walked out of the office. At that moment, inside a nearby coffee shop blocks from the square, Leah, a first-year student who had live-streamed Evelyn's confrontation with Officer Dorian Pierce, was coordinating a tech response team. Dash cams, backup recorders, redundant power. If they touch her, the world will see. There's no off switch here. 9:00 p.m. Evelyn left Rutledge Community Center having just finished teaching her Stand Tall class for young black girls. She didn't take her car. She walked just like she always did. From the far end of the street, a gray sedan crept forward. Headlights off. Evelyn paused. She knew. This wasn't random, but she didn't panic. She calmly pulled her phone from her coat and started live streaming. The signal routed directly to Leah's operations hub. If you're watching, I'm okay, but there's a vehicle following me. No license plate. I'm at the corner of King and Rutledge. Within 2 minutes, 6 citizen cameras turned toward Evelyn. From a second-story window, a woman shouted, "Miss Evelyn, I'm recording. Don't worry." An older man watering his plants stepped into the street, holding his phone camera high, standing between Evelyn and the car. The gray sedan came to a stop. At that moment, the whole block held its breath. Then police sirens. But not from Evelyn's direction. 3 unmarked cruisers appeared behind the gray sedan, boxing it in on both sides of the street. A young officer stepped out and shouted, "Unlicensed vehicle search order, IR4, immediate compliance required." The door opened. The man who stepped out was Lieutenant Derek Kane, Maxwell's former right-hand man, a senior officer often called untouchable. Evelyn said nothing. She stared straight into Kane's eyes as he was handcuffed and led to a cruiser. Leah live-streamed the arrest, and within 1 hour, it had over 4 million views. A new hashtag began to trend. No more. Immunity. Maxwell watched the clip from his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. But this time, there was no fear, no hesitation. He turned the wheel, heading back to the station, where the deepest investigation yet into the very system he once led would now begin. That night, after surviving yet another threat, Evelyn posted a single line on social media. "They thought I'd be afraid, but all I see is that the fire is rising at just the right time." The next morning, while Charleston was still reeling from the arrest of Lieutenant Derek Kane, something unprecedented happened at City Hall. Over 300 citizens lined up, starting at 6 a.m., holding folders, complaint forms, and scraps of paper scribbled with memories of when they were silenced, mistreated, or abused by those in power. The entrance doors to the main lobby had yet to open, but no one looked tired. At the front of the line stood Mrs. Pearl Jameson, 78 years old, hands trembling as she clutched a worn-out file folder. "Back in 1993, the police raided my house with no warrant. They said they were looking for my grandson, but the truth is, it was because I was raising 3 black children who weren't biologically mine. I submitted complaints 3 times. No response. Today I'm here, so they'll have no choice but to read it." A few college volunteers helped hold her folder. One of them asked, "Ma'am, do you think this time will be different?" Pearl squinted toward the far hallway where a large photograph of Evelyn Hart was now mounted on the wall. "Different. Of course, because this time, I'm not alone." Inside the grand chamber, Chief Inspector Maxwell Hart stepped onto the podium. No uniform, no badge. Before him sat press members, federal observers, and former colleagues. Many now sat at a distance. He opened his laptop and projected a massive data chart on the screen. In the past 10 years, over 462 complaints of abuse of power never made it to formal review. Of those, 87% came from minority communities. He didn't need to say more. The numbers accused the system all by themselves. Maxwell continued, eyes steady. I was once part of that machine. But today, I'm standing here in a different role, as a citizen, as a husband, as a father who refuses to let his daughter grow up in a city where silence is guarded more fiercely than the truth. At the same time, over at Simmons High School, freshman Leah Patterson, the same student who live-streamed Evelyn's first confrontation, led a discussion with 11th and 12th graders. No microphone, no auditorium. Just a whiteboard with words written in marker stand tall, not as resistance, but as existence. A student raised a hand. Do you think filming videos can change laws? Leah paused, looking across the room. No, not if you just hit record and then shut it off. But if you stand with the person, protect them, share their story day after day, then it's not just laws that will change. It's the way people look at each other. That afternoon across town, a young officer named Jordan Wells requested to reopen a 2021 complaint he had been pressured to resolve internally. At the bottom of his form, he added a single line, I choose to stand in the light, even if the light exposes every stain. The story leaked online and quickly sparked widespread support. A new hashtag began trending, I choose, to stand over 30,000 posts in just 5 hours. That same evening, Evelyn Hart took the stage at a community gathering at St. Clair Theater. No one introduced her. When she appeared, the audience rose to their feet, silently. No applause is necessary. Evelyn carried no speech, only a small slip of paper. I wrote this 22 years ago when my daughter once asked me, Mom, are you afraid of the police? I wrote, I'm not afraid, but I'm sad that I have to be. Today, I reread it. And I want to say this to every little girl growing up in this city. Hold your head high, not to defy, but to remind the world that you exist. The theater was still. Some cried. Some held hands. But everyone there understood. A new era had begun. Early that morning, the third-floor conference room at Charleston Police Headquarters was thick with air as heavy as stone. Someone had silently taken down the portrait of Evelyn Hart on the wall, which once hung in the Civic Honors Corner. Lieutenant Colonel Malcolm Raines, head of Internal Affairs, entered, holding a file over 400 pages thick, a compilation of complaints, archived internally from the last 15 years. He dropped it on the table like a bomb. We're out of options. The public is watching every move we make. If we don't act, the entire system will blow under the pressure. A long silence followed, until Deputy Director Gwen Hollister spoke, voice cold as steel. If we open all these files, you know what will happen. Reputations, careers people who thought they were untouched will be dragged into it. Malcolm didn't look away. I know. But this time, if we don't let ourselves burn, the whole city will burn instead. Meanwhile, at Simmons High School, Leah Patterson, the college student who live-streamed Evelyn's first confrontation with Cain, had returned, but not as a student. This time as a guest speaker in an event called Civic Values and the Right to Know. She recounted the moment her phone buzzed in her hand with thousands of comments and shares, her heart pounding as she realized she was no longer a bystander. I realized power doesn't only lie in the hands of those with guns. It also lives in the hands of those holding cameras, standing still, telling the truth. Before she could finish, a group of students stood and applauded. That afternoon, in a modest room behind Ebenezer Church, Evelyn Hart held her first private meeting with 8 citizens whose complaints had once been swallowed into silence. No press, no live stream, just pens, water, and a whiteboard bearing a single phrase. We are rewriting the truth, one line at a time. Mrs. Patricia Sanders, 62, spoke with a trembling voice. In 2005, police knocked on my door at 2 a.m., said there was an alarm. Then they burst in and tore through everything without cause. They thought I was dead already, but I've never truly lived until now. Evelyn didn't take notes. She just listened, and after each story nodded, as if etching every word into memory. "We're not just writing complaints," she said. "We're writing this city's history for the first time in ink they can't bury." That evening, the Charleston Police Department issued a shocking public statement. All internal complaint records from the past 15 years will be transferred to the Independent Civilian Oversight Board for reinvestigation. Public reaction was sharply divided. Half called it a historic step. The other half accused Hart is destroying the foundation of public safety. On an anonymous forum used by law enforcement, a post appeared under the title, "The Traitor from Within." The content urged officers to boycott Chief Maxwell Hart, branding him a man who had sold out his brothers in uniform for his wife. Dozens of comments followed, some in support, others demanding Evelyn be investigated in return. But what no one expected was a response on the same forum posted anonymously by an account later identified as Lieutenant Jordan Wells. "I used to stay silent, out of fear. But when I saw that woman standing alone on King Street, without flinching, I knew if I stayed quiet any longer, I'd stop being human." The next day at a press conference at City Hall, Evelyn appeared unannounced. She didn't sit in the front row. She didn't hold a mic. But when a reporter turned to ask, "What do you say to those calling you a threat to public safety?" Evelyn stood eyes direct. If a city believes that someone demanding the truth is a threat, then the real danger isn't me. It's how far they've buried the truth under the cement of fear and habit. The room went completely silent. A blow delivered without shouting. Only by standing. The night before the first public hearing, Maxwell Hart, chief of the Charleston Police Department and husband of Evelyn, returned to his office late. The street lamp beyond the glass wall reflected off his sunken, sleepless eyes. An unmarked envelope was on his desk, alongside files prepared for the hearing. No return address. No postal stamp. Inside was a photo of Evelyn teaching her Stand Tall class at the community center. A red ink streak slashed across her throat, and below it, a single typed line in Courier New font. "If you don't stop, we'll do something you can't undo." Maxwell stared at the words without blinking. He inhaled deeply, folded the photo, tucked it into a drawer, and then picked up the phone. "Emergency. I need all camera footage from the last 72 hours around the community center. Encrypted transmission, eyes only." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Chief, if the person who sent this is from inside, then I need to know exactly who it is." The next morning, City Hall was packed. Journalists, students, lawyers, and ordinary citizens, many of whom had never attended a hearing before. Evelyn sat in the third row. No microphone, no prepared speech, but her presence in an ash-gray coat, her signature pearl necklace, and eyes that held no fear brought a gravity everyone in the chamber could feel. The presence of someone who had awakened an entire city. At the podium stood Maxwell, not in uniform, just a husband, a citizen, a former officer who once swore to uphold law and truth. He opened the hearing with a single sentence that silenced the entire room. "I'm not here to defend the organization I lead. I'm here because I can no longer live inside a system where silence is worth more than truth." When Deputy Chief Dalton Briggs, a 28-year veteran, was called to testify, he avoided Maxwell's gaze. "I'm concerned, very concerned. These internal investigations are becoming politicized. Officers are afraid to do their jobs now, afraid of being filmed, judged." Evelyn stood. No one called on her. No one stopped her. She stepped forward calmly, deliberately, and faced Briggs. And were officers also afraid when they aimed a gun at a woman walking with a gift for her husband? Her question wasn't loud. wasn't hostile, but it shook the entire chamber. Briggs stammered. I didn't. I wasn't referring to your case. Evelyn took another step. I don't want an apology. I want you to answer who is afraid of this system, the people, or the ones holding the guns. After the hearing, social media flooded with quotes from Evelyn and Maxwell that quickly went viral. Silence is never neutral. Justice doesn't require privilege, just courage. They don't want you afraid. They want you silent. On the old brick wall, where the first poster once read, "Equality is not a privilege," someone had added a new line. Evelyn Hart doesn't demand the light. She makes the darkness back away. That night, Evelyn returned home. The front gate was slightly ajar. The porch light was out. A long stretch of shadow lay from the walkway to the steps. On the front step, a knife stabbed into the wooden frame, and beneath it, a handwritten note, trembling with malice. The truth won't protect you forever. Evelyn looked down. She didn't bend to pick up the note. Instead, she pulled out her phone and made a quick call. Send a photo to the press. Timestamp it. No need to blur anything. It's time the world sees how weak these threats are. Monday, 8:00 a.m., in front of Charleston City Hall. A light rain was falling. Spring. Rain is not cold or harsh, but is like cleansing. Evelyn. Hart stood beneath a white umbrella, the pearl necklace around her neck gleaming with silver reflections. Beside her was her husband, former police chief Maxwell Hart, no longer in uniform, only hands clasping tightly to the truth. In front of them, over 3,000 citizens gathered. There are no flashy banners, just handwritten signs in bold marker. We will not be silent. To stand tall requires no weapons. Evelyn is my mother, is me, is my daughter. 8:00 a.m. Inside the main chamber, the special session of the Charleston City Council began. On the table was a 7-point reform proposal drafted by Evelyn and the Stand Tall community group, including 1. Establishment of an independent civilian oversight board. 2. The full release of all complaints against police officers. 3. Legal protections and career advancement for whistleblowers. 4. Mandatory body cameras for all civilian interactions. 5. Retraining in civil rights for every officer. 6. Reopen all previously dismissed cases on a questionable basis. 7. Transparent investigative procedures with set deadlines. The proposal was printed on 300 copies of recycled paper, each bearing the line, written by citizens, not politicians. 10:00 a.m. The deciding moment. The City Council President, a man who once fiercely opposed Evelyn, slowly stood. His hand trembled as he held the microphone. I once called this movement the personalization of a single incident. Today, I must admit, I was wrong. No one has the right to remain silent, despite what we've witnessed. Applause erupted, but Evelyn didn't clap. She nodded, just once, a nod that said everything. Evelyn didn't read from a page when it was her turn to speak. She told the story of a 16-year-old girl from her Stand Tall class. The girl was held after class for saying, "I disagree." They called it insubordination. I taught her that disagreeing with injustice is the beginning of justice. Today, I do not stand here as a victim. I stand here as a citizen who knows the right to walk without suspicion is not a privilege. It is a fundamental human right. That afternoon, the national media broadcasted every minute of the vote. Final tally: votes in favor, 2 opposed. The Hart Code was officially passed. That same evening, major networks ran these headlines: NBC, Pearls and Justice, the woman who made the system bow. CNN, Charleston overhauled, when truth is no longer a confidential file. BBC, Evelyn Hart, the woman who stood still. so her city could learn to move forward. Something unexpected appeared that night on the corner where Evelyn was once stopped for wearing her necklace. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no fanfare. But on the old red brick wall, a new mural had emerged. It was Evelyn standing tall in the rain. No slogan, no raised fist, no shouting, just a gaze straight ahead. Beneath it, handwritten, "One person stood, and the whole city learned how to walk." The following month, Evelyn received an invitation from UN Women to speak at the Global Human Rights Conference. She declined. She stayed in Charleston. Every Tuesday, she still teaches, "Stand Tall." That 16-year-old girl, she's now mentoring the next generation. Maxwell, after stepping down, began advising other cities on police reform, but he knew it was his wife who made the change begin. In the center square, the people of Charleston built a long wooden bench. No plaque, no bronze statue, only one engraved line. "If you are tired of silence, sit here and begin to speak." Evelyn Hart did not become a legend. She became a pathfinder, a torch that didn't blaze, but burned quietly inside the hearts of every citizen who was once told to stay silent.